Russia's fuel supply is collapsing. On August 26th, Ukraine struck the NORSI oil refinery in Kstovo, Russia's fourth-largest refinery and second-largest gasoline producer, and it has completely halted processing. All of Lukoil's major Russian refineries are now out of operation. The Perm refinery stopped after a drone attack on August 21st. The Volgograd refinery stopped on July 31st. Russia, the world's second-largest oil exporter, is now importing record amounts of fuel from Belarus because it can no longer meet its own needs. To understand why this moment matters, we need to examine the strategic shift that has occurred in this conflict. For more than 4 years, Russia has waged a brutal war of attrition against Ukraine. The invasion, which began in February 2022, has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced millions. But the character of this conflict has evolved dramatically. What began as a conventional ground war has transformed into a war of deep strikes, economic warfare, and technological innovation. Russia's strategy has been blunt and relentless. Massive artillery barges, glide bombs reducing Ukrainian cities to rubble, waves of drones and missiles targeting civilian infrastructure. Moscow has banked on its ability to outlast Ukraine's Western support. But Ukraine has responded with a strategy of its own, one that targets the very arteries of Russia's war economy. The Institute for the Study of War reports that Ukraine's campaign against Russian oil infrastructure has achieved something remarkable. Russian fuel imports from Belarus have surged to record levels. Gasoline production in Russia fell to about 65% of average seasonal consumption, while diesel output dropped to nearly the level of domestic demand. These are not temporary disruptions. They represent a structural degradation of Russia's refining capacity. Let's get into the hard data. On August 26th, a Ukrainian drone attack damaged an unspecified industrial facility in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region, local Governor Gleb Nikitin said. Ukraine's general staff later confirmed that the facility was NORSI, the Lukoil Nizhny refinery in the city of Kstovo. NORSI is no ordinary refinery. It can process about 15 million metric tons of crude oil per year and produces approximately 5 million tons of gasoline, more than 5 million tons of diesel fuel, 2 million tons of fuel oil, and about 500,000 tons of bitumen. It is Russia's fourth-largest oil refinery and second-largest gasoline producer. The drone attack damaged several processing units, infrastructure between the units, and general plant facilities. Sources could not say when the damage would be repaired and oil processing would resume. The refinery is now completely out of operation. But NORSI is not an isolated case. All of Lukoil's major Russian refineries are currently out of operation. The Perm refinery stopped working after a drone attack on August 21st. The Volgograd refinery stopped on July 31st. The Afipsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar Krai was struck by Ukrainian drones overnight on August 25th, causing a massive fire. The refinery has a design capacity of 6.25 million tons of crude oil per year. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wrote on August 26th that over the past day, Ukraine struck 16 targets in Russia. He said that Ukraine conducted long-range strikes against Russia's oil facilities, a military enterprise, Russian logistics, airfields, a missile unit, and infrastructure used by Russia to launch attacks against Ukraine. The war must return to where it came from. Ukraine responds to Russian strikes, and we do so in a way that ensures the cost of the war for the aggressor inevitably rises, Zelensky wrote. The cumulative effect is undeniable. As of August 14th, Ukrainian drones had attacked nearly one-third of the large oil refineries in Russia. Orsknefteyorgsince, another major Russian oil refinery, completely stopped operations following Ukrainian attacks. According to Reuters, rail shipments of gasoline from Belarus to Russia rose 13% in July from June, reaching 212,000 metric tons. Diesel deliveries doubled over the same period to 162,000 tons. During the first 7 months of 2026, gasoline shipments from Belarus to Russia increased 25-fold compared with the same period last year, reaching nearly 665,000 tons. Diesel imports rose almost 7-fold to 418,000 tons. In addition to Belarus, Russia has also begun importing gasoline from India, Kazakhstan, and Morocco. The active phase of the fuel crisis, according to a Russian State Duma committee member, was supposed to end well before September 1st, but with NORSI now offline, those predictions appear optimistic. So what's driving this unprecedented campaign? The strategic logic is twofold. Increase the cost of war for Russia while exposing vulnerabilities in its defense and economic systems. First, Ukraine is systematically targeting Russia's oil and gas sector, the revenue stream that funds Putin's war machine. President Zelensky has explicitly stated that these strikes are part of an effort to ensure the cost of the war for the aggressor inevitably rises. By hitting refineries, storage tanks, and distribution networks, Ukraine is attacking the Kremlin's financial lifeline. Second, Ukraine is engaging in what the Institute for the Study of War calls a concerted suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses campaign, escalating/dead, in military terminology. Ukrainian forces appear to be conducting this campaign against Russian air defense assets in Russian border regions as part of their broader targeting of Russian economic and military assets within Russia and occupied Ukraine. The timing is significant. The ISW reports that Ukraine has been conducting long-range strikes against Russian military and energy infrastructure with increasing frequency. The strikes on NORSI, Perm, Volgograd, and Afipsky form a deliberate campaign of attrition, not opportunistic attacks. The recent strikes also hit a Syzran oil refinery in Russia's Samara region on August 4th. Russia's response reveals a command structure under pressure. On August 5th, President Vladimir Putin announced a major military reshuffle. He created a new branch of the military, the Unmanned Systems Forces, and appointed Colonel General Denis Lyman to head it. Putin described Lyman as one of the most qualified specialists for the role and tasked him with completing the new branch's formation and taking command in the near future. Putin also replaced key frontline commanders. Colonel General Andrei Ivanev was appointed to command the Center Group of Forces, tasked with capturing the entirety of the Donetsk region, an operation Putin himself described as critical and high risk. And Colonel General Valery Solodchuk, formerly commander of the Center Group, was elevated to Deputy Minister of Defense responsible for logistics. These command changes are a sign of desperation. When you replace commanders and restructure the military mid-war, you're admitting that the previous structure wasn't working. Putin's statement that Russia is continuing to perfect the organizational structure of the defense ministry is Kremlin speak for, "We are losing, and we need to try something different." The economic strain on Russia is intensifying. The fuel shortages are not merely a military problem. They are beginning to affect ordinary Russians. The fuel crisis has been acute during Russia's busy summer tourist season, when demand for gasoline and diesel typically peaks. Russia's reliance on Belarusian imports to compensate represents a significant vulnerability. The imports are not just expensive. They demonstrate that Russia's domestic refining capacity can no longer meet civilian and military demands simultaneously. Belarusian gasoline is significantly more expensive than Russian gasoline, costing about 111,000 rubles per ton for AI 92 and 124,000 rubles per ton for AI 95. The Belarusian supply cannot fully substitute for Russia's lost refining capacity. Belarusian refineries produce about 3.5 million tons of gasoline per year combined, less than a single Russian refinery like Omsk, which produces 5 million tons. Belarus exports about 2.3 million tons of gasoline per year total, less than Russia consumes in 1 month. Moscow plans to import 400,000 tons of gasoline monthly from abroad, a staggering figure that reveals the depth of the crisis. Russia's response includes significant economic measures. The Russian government banned diesel exports, allowing exceptions only for previously signed contracts and supplies made under intergovernmental agreements. Similar restrictions on gasoline and jet fuel exports had already been in place. The ISW reports that Russia is also introducing additional relief measures for Russian enterprises in an effort to mitigate economic damage that Ukraine's ongoing strike campaign imposes. The pressure extends beyond oil. Ukrainian strikes have targeted warehouses and logistics facilities across Russia. The Russian online retailer Ozon had a warehouse in the Orenburg region hit by a drone attack on August 23rd. These strikes are beginning to cause significant financial losses for Russian retail companies and making the war tangible for ordinary Russians. The ISW also reports that Putin is setting conditions for the widespread nationalization of Russian private assets under the broad pretext of defending critical enterprises against Ukrainian strikes, likely in part to generate additional state revenues. This represents a significant shift in Russia's economic policy, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the Russian economy. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to suffer devastating attacks. The ISW reports that Russian forces conducted a double-tap Garin-type drone strike against an electric train at the Lymanivka station in Kharkiv Oblast, killing 1 and injuring 4 civilians. Russian forces also struck a Zhytomyr-Odessa passenger train, which had 593 people on board, including 15 children, though Ukrainian officials were able to evacuate the train in time. Russia continues to target Ukrainian railways, a critical lifeline for civilian and military logistics. The ripple effects of this conflict extend far beyond Ukraine and Russia. The war has fundamentally reshaped European security architecture, energy markets, and global alliances. NATO is at a crossroads. The alliance's strategic objective is clear: ensure Ukraine can defend itself without triggering a direct military confrontation with Russia. But achieving that balance is becoming increasingly difficult. The intensifying Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, coupled with Ukraine's aggressive drone strikes against Russian territory, are raising the temperature on both sides. On August 25th, Ukraine received approval from the UK and France to produce long-range Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. President Zelensky confirmed that French President Emmanuel Macron had agreed to lift restrictions on the Scalp missiles and related licenses. The UK has also agreed to let European defense company MBDA share classified technical information on British-made parts of Scalp missiles with Ukraine. This represents a significant upgrade in Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities. The United States also made a dramatic move in late August. The U.S. asked Ukraine not to strike Moscow and St. Petersburg while CIA Director John Ratcliffe visited Russia. A person familiar with the situation told the Kyiv Independent. The source said, "They don't believe in the strength of Putin's air defenses," a remarkable admission from the CIA about Russia's military capabilities. This marks Ratcliffe's first known official trip to Russia and signals ongoing high-level U.S.-Russian communication even amid the war. The Vatican is also engaged diplomatically. On August 25th, Vatican Foreign Minister Archbishop Paul Gallagher met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow, the first in-person talks between Vatican and Russian officials in 5 years. Gallagher said every day that the war continues creates new victims and renders future reconciliation ever more difficult. He called for an end to the conflict and discussed humanitarian cooperation, including caring for children impacted by the war. Ukraine continues to seek more air defense support. Britain's new Prime Minister Andy Burnham is preparing to visit Kyiv on his first foreign trip, signaling continued British backing. Norway has also confirmed $9 billion in financial support for Ukraine in 2027, and Ukraine will receive several Krotal air defense systems and AIM missiles, as well as additional missiles for Patriot systems. But the Shadow Fleet and sanctions enforcement remain a battleground. Russia has been conspicuously flaunting its ability to evade sanctions. However, Ukrainian drone strikes against cargo ships and tankers in the Black Sea are changing the risk calculus. Russian insurance companies have stopped covering military risks for Black Sea shipping. The EU continues to struggle with implementing new packages as member states demand exemptions to protect their own economic interests. So where does this leave us? Ukraine's drone campaign has inflicted serious damage on Russia's war economy. The NORSI refinery, Russia's fourth largest and second largest gasoline producer, is now completely out of operation. All of Lukoil's major Russian refineries are offline. Russia now relies on record imports of fuel from Belarus, India, Kazakhstan, and Morocco. The Kremlin is reorganizing its military command, creating new drone forces, and appointing new generals. But these are defensive moves, reactions to Ukrainian initiatives, not proactive strategies. The fundamental question is one of endurance. Can Ukraine sustain its strike campaign as winter approaches and its Patriot interceptors run low? The U.S. asking Ukraine not to strike Moscow during the CIA director's visit suggests Washington is still wary of escalation. But Ukraine has also secured approval to produce Storm Shadow missiles domestically, potentially expanding its strike capability. What will happen when the Russian economy starts to buckle and the Russian people start to feel the pain in their daily lives? That's the question that should be troubling the Kremlin most of all. If you want to stay informed on this developing story, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And let me know in the comments. Do you think Ukraine's drone campaign will force Putin to change course? Or will Russia simply absorb the damage and continue its grinding offensive?